Okay, welcome back to the Hogtown podcast, episode 60, this time with a guest joining us from Austin, Texas, Bobby Fijan, co-founder of the American Housing Corporation. Thanks for joining us.
So glad to be on here.
We've talked a little bit about what you guys are up to at a very high level, and we try to save like most of it from when we could have you on to tell us about it. But I guess like we know, generally speaking, modular prefabrication. Tell us about the American Housing Corporation, how it came to be, and how maybe you're differentiated from other developers that are prefabricating housing?
Uh, wow. Let's see. So a lot of things in there. I'll break it down a bit. I would say one of the main things that makes us different is that we are in fact like a developer, right? So we're vertically integrated in that we are building stuff for ourselves. We're buying land, we're building a home. So we're not a subcontractor of anyone else, and we're not even doing projects for other developers. I'd say there's some light stuff where we're doing or exploring like some more JVs where like land
Yeah.
is contributed, we're doing it, but like essentially like we are a manufacturer, and also we are a real estate developer. So end to end, soup to nuts. And I would say that like first, um, or that differentiation, I think like then affects kind of everything else that we're doing. So we're trying to, or we are designing processes to deliver the types of housing that we're trying to build like very well. So rather than say like fine tune our factory to take other people's plans and design them well, we're just trying to design components that get assembled into a fairly broad variety of different unit plans, but within like the limitations of our specific system. So I'd say that's kind of the very high level difference of what we're doing. So we are a full on industrial manufacturing company, and we're a full on real estate development company.
Just
Yeah,
on
and
on that, can you maybe help me understand, like, as developers ourselves, I sort of understand how at the deal level projects are financed, how you'd raise money and sort of deliver an actual, delivery of housing on a particular address. What's the capital stack of actually building an industrial manufacturing business? Like, how do you finance the like manufacturing side of the business versus like the deal side of the business? Are you guys venture capital backed? Like, what's the backstory of actually getting the company off the ground?
No, yes, I'd say like you put your finger on the exact differentiation. So like we have venture capital investors, and we have real estate investors. We also have land investors too, because there's as we are sort of spinning up, like that is the easiest thing for our investors to, or for our real estate investors to put money into, as we move from, call it, production line into the overall project. But yeah, high level, generally we have like two broad sets of capital: venture capital and real estate capital. Even on the venture capital side, like we now have a pretty significant amount of dollars that's financing like the actual machines. So that's again different sort of capital than the venture side. But venture side basically like funds like R&D and funds like the company in order to design a system that can like overall lower construction costs. But the idea is that through doing all this R&D, through designing a system, and through building a large production facility, we can then deliver to our real estate capital investors, um, at or above market returns on specific real estate projects. So you don't
Right.
want to use venture capital to fund real estate capital projects unless it's for a very short period of time or to prove something like in a very like quick window. And in the same way, like real estate capital would just never be able to take the kinds of risks that are necessary to fund, the tens of millions of dollars required to stand up facilities and to
Yeah, yeah.
put into R&D. So
we've seen a number of like prefabricated like real estate vendors either fail to achieve scale or fail altogether. Like Cartera is kind of like the infamous example. It
yep.
seems to me that one like very smart thing that you guys are doing, like being fully integrated, as you said, soup to nuts. Like there are two big problems that I think you're solving, and tell me this if this is how you guys think about it. The first is that to achieve any meaningful cost savings, you need scale, right? So like there are these kind of like modular builders in Toronto. One recently just went bankrupt. And my sense as to why that is, they haven't ever been able to deliver lower cost of construction than conventional construction. And like their reason for it, and I think it's correct, is that they need the scale required to kind of like drive down the per unit or per square foot cost, and they never achieved it. You guys, by being the developer itself, you're your own clients. So to some extent, you get to control both the supply of your modular systems, but also the demand by having the projects be kind of like under your control. And then the other thing we see often when we talk about, especially like panelized systems, we do a lot of like stick frame, 3-4 story stuff here in Toronto. They need you very involved. They need to be very involved in the early design stages. And once you've already gone through kind of like a first pass at your schematic design and development drawings, it's almost like you have to redo a lot of that work with that panelized system in mind. And often at that point, we're like, well, forget it. We don't want to do that. We'll just bring on like typical framers on site. So by being kind of like soup to nuts, you guarantee your own demand and you ensure that like from the earliest underwriting, your system is being contemplated. Is that basically right?
So I would say that's right. I would also say like there's a few other parts that are like I think even a little more clever
Sure.
to our home, but I think it's something that like based on the project looks like you guys do, you'll also understand too. So I would say like it is very important that we deliver costs that are at or below like project costs like today for the deal level again for real estate investors. But I think the really important thing about costs, which we all understand being like on the infill side or for the institutional side, is that um, construction costs are not fixed even within individual markets. So I'd say like one of the reasons we're choosing to go after infill and we're choosing to go after row homes and smaller projects is that those are places where the costs are higher, like in the individual like market, right? So why does that happen? Again, lots of different things. I'm sure we could go back and forth on it. Like small subcontractors like to become big subcontractors. They work on big projects. So you have the constant churn of like either the different MEP subs or whoever it is, and also the general conditions are high on small projects anyway, so they end up overburdening individual projects. So I would say like, yes, everything you said, that's correct. And also like the reason why, in addition to the part of like product and families and all that stuff that we're doing like infill, is that infill construction costs are higher. And so if we can do that, it just enables us to like, I'd say very very clearly try and solve a problem that's just purely based on like technology of like, okay, we know there's demand in infill. People want to live there. Why doesn't it get built? You know, the check sizes aren't right. The costs are wrong. So we're going to try and solve like the costs. So
Can I ask you a
Sure, go
couple
ahead,
of
Matt.
questions to expand on that? Why, like, I understand at the early stages wanting to sort of like consume your own system. Is that the ultimate goal? Or if you actually get to a point where you are manufacturing at scale, do you see a world where you are producing homes for other developers as well? And at this stage, you're really just sort of like perfecting and refining the model to get to that economy of scale that you're looking for? Or is this purely and always a vertically integrated model in your mind?
I say like, as an entrepreneur, like I always think about things in terms of like short, medium, and long term. And mostly to me, it's about like generally getting the long term right directionally, but mostly just avoiding the things that are going to kill our company. And as long as you avoid those and you stay alive for long enough, then you earn the right to sort of figure out things later. So you're not wrong in that, like, if we figure out how to build like costs, like things that are less costly at a large scale, like then we'll have to figure out, okay, great. Like, I mean, our goal is as any self-respecting like venture-backed company is to be the largest like of our category in the entire world, right? So D.R. Horton builds 100,000 homes a year. We want to build whatever, 10 times that, right? So you cannot practically do that either without becoming an extremely headcount heavy like development company, which would be very difficult, or else figuring out some way to sell other people.
Right.
So I would say like I leave that question open. Like either one of those two is very hard, but I just know that like in either circumstance, the thing we really need to do in the short and medium term is like we have to prove that we can deliver a really good product and that it is in fact cheaper or that it is better. Right. And if we can do that thing, then we can make stuff better. And then also I'd say to dial in like which types of plans or projects we'd be willing to do, because looking at Katera and some of these other modular builders, I think their cardinal sin that they did is like they end up taking assignments that they shouldn't have, right? Like their system doesn't work for it, or they have to do things, they
Yeah.
have to change things in the field, and all the advantages that come with industrial manufacturing end up like going away. And then you're left with the system we have now, or I'd say the end state we have now, where most people will tell you like modular construction isn't cheaper, it's just faster. Right. And that's fine. And speed has some value. But it's just not good enough. And in fact, it should be
that's the
cheaper.
first red flag when you're talking to a modular builder that's trying to sell you something. When you start asking them costs and they say, "Oh, don't worry, we'll save you a couple months." So, well, I asked you about costs.
Yeah. So that's where I try to be honest of like, and again, I think a real estate investor or developer would understand. It's like I am not trying to be cheaper than lots of other people, right? Again, like the D.R. Hortons, the Lennars, the big home builders of the world, like they are incredibly cheap. And I think there's a graveyard of companies who have just like underestimated how good they are or how good other like large scale multifamily developers are. It's like, good luck. You want to beat the Trammell Crows of the world? You want to beat Hines? Like, okay, you want to go head to head and buy a site that they're also interested in? Like, I'm just not excited about paying more for land than Hines. But if you're doing 3, 6, 12, or even 20 units, maybe even 40, again, I've been a local developer. I know you guys are too. Like, there just aren't that many people who are competing over those different parcels, and there is at least a credible reason for like why you can win a deal. And if you have some theoretical advantage on cost or product, then it makes sense for you to win it, rather than you just said the biggest number, which is the case if you're doing any project of any institutional scale, whether it's on the home building side or on the institutional multi-development side.
Yeah, so you mentioned like industrial manufacturing benefits from doing the same thing over and over again, and kind of like defining your product, designing your product, and just like finding sites where you could plug it in. It seems like townhouses, row houses are like the perfect typology for that, because not only is it like a very typical kind of like lot size, but also I would assume, not being overly familiar with like the fragmentation of codes across America, but that like at that scale of project, it's kind of like it's less burned in by like than let's say like taller multi-unit housing. So is it like one of the fragmentations that we see limit economies of scale for modular is just like different jurisdictions requiring different things? Are townhouses like, is it generally pretty kind of like vanilla across the board, like what you're designing fits in most places?
I would take exception to the word vanilla, but with
Sure.
everything else, everything else
Uniform.
I would agree on. Uniform. There you go.
Yeah.
Beautiful
So yes,
French
I would say
vanilla. Yeah.
while they are not allowed everywhere, every building code has townhouses or row houses or attached like 4, 6, 8-plex in there somehow. And there are obviously different codes that apply to different areas. Like in the Mountain West, you're going to have much more robust like fire standards. In California, you're going to have seismic requirements. So I'd say they change a bit. But at least it is a building type that is contemplated everywhere. It's not like a single stair building which just like doesn't exist,
Right.
or we need different things to change. So obviously, like we want a townhouses to be allowed in more places, but they also but where they are allowed, there is fairly straightforward like building codes like that meet the standard. And I guess like the other thing that I also say is from a technology company perspective, especially one that's trying to like move quickly, the other big advantage of the row house or townhouse typology is the feedback loop is very tight. Like, I mean, we can assemble a unit, in more or less a week, right? Like, or the structural elements of it, and that enables us to make adjustments. Or to figure things out and go faster. The downside of doing something larger would be just based on how long you're going to spend doing like site work or just approvals or anything else. It's going to be like 12 months, even if you're going faster, right? Like on the overall assembly of the unit. So you're just not going to have as much time on did people like my product? Did they not? Like, what was about the change? Like, I can make those changes very quickly within the row house, townhouse thing, even within an individual community. So there's, and then the last sort of thing to it on product is like, I just think it's really nice. I think it's a really good topology, right? And it happens to be one of the few or one of the things that is particularly not done well, and yet we also know, like in North America and Europe, elsewhere, that it's highly in demand. And I think that the decline in quality, especially among wall assembly systems, affects that topology particularly well, which is the other thing that industrial manufacturing does really well. It can do standardization well, but it can do like very robust materials much better.
For like sound, you meaning for like sound insulation as an example?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're working with very large materials, and so there's two different like kind of like big advantage you get from working in like a factory. One is like that you can work if you want to, like 24 hours a day, like 12 months a year. And then the other one is that in working with machinery, you can work with parts that are so large that a human being couldn't lift them, right? So we're working with 20, 40 foot long panels that are several thousand pounds, because you get like nice like standard things you can use, like a big CNC machine to cut it down. You can put stuff together, and these very large, I'd say robust materials are things that can deliver sound insulation, fire rating, all with the goal of reducing the amount of hours that are done on site. Because that's like So the more stuff you build in the factory, the less stuff you have to do on site. And then you can just work with bigger pieces. So I'd say those are the kinds of few reasons why the topology works and why industrial manufacturing works as a starting point. Now, we'll eventually, God willing, do other building types, but for the time being, there's a lot of demand for townhouses, and I think we can build a whole lot of them.
One of the other benefits of building stuff in a factory, I assume, is that you can do it with non-union labor, which is often like a major inflator of labor costs in a pro forma. Do you face any obstacles to like some jurisdictions won't let you deliver your system? Like, are there any constraints as far as that goes? Like, we see that here again on larger projects where if it's like a union site, like they won't let like a certain vendor of precast concrete come on because they're not registrants and so on. Is that
Yep.
is that like part of the calculus?
I'm not a lawyer.
Sure.
What I would say is we have lawyers, and our lawyers in the United States, I would say there is a legal theory called the Dormant Commerce Clause,
Okay.
which is basically that places in some states are not allowed to, since they're not the federal government, they're not allowed to reach over and tell what someone else in another state is willing to do.
Got it.
So there's that like general like legal philosophy. The other one, which again, like I think any local developer would understand, that unless people in individual area want it to happen, whether that's because they're connected to unions or because of some other reason, if they just don't like you, there's 15 ways from Sunday that they can just make sure your project doesn't occur. So you would be
Right.
a fool to just say like, go screw yourself. Like I have the building permit from the state, or I don't even care if you have a union requirement. Like my constitutional lawyer says it's fine. It's like, okay, cool. Like it'll be 18 months before your building's
Right.
connected to the grid.
Yeah.
The fire marshal will never get around to inspecting it, whatever
They'll
it
find
is. Like,
ways.
so
Yeah, totally.
right, they'll find ways. Right. So,
Yeah.
so there's no point, I'd say, in getting into that. So I think there's
Sure.
general things where like it is useful, and yet they could still stop it if they really want to. So I would say that under that general like framework, it isn't a factor of like union versus non-union as much. Although in Texas we do not have to be union. That may change later. We may want to do that. I'm not sure. But I would say the main difference is us finding places where our costs are less than the local costs in an individual market, right? So whether that's in some place that'll be easier to do, that's because a union, somewhere that it's not. So it's more about like finding that arbitrage, right? So construction costs in Austin are very low, right? And
Yeah.
the reason why they're low is because they've built a lot of other housing and a lot of other people live here, and so I'd say it's one of the different things that enables us to build here and ship to other places where there is that cost difference. So whether that's due to union or whether that's due to regulation or whether it's due to like, because San Francisco is so high, you're going to pay anyone who lays tile
Yeah.
$50 an hour, right? Because he's
There's like a
driving like
cost of
90
living
minutes.
adjustment. Yeah,
Right,
that's right.
right. Exactly. And that's why D.R. Horton or Lennar can build for, under $100 a foot in Houston, because, you can buy a house for $200,000. Yeah.
On that point, I don't know if you read Brian Potter's book, who like talks a lot about like, the origins of efficiency and so on. His like general, not critique, but analysis as to why these systems are often challenged is because a lot of the cost savings you are realizing in the factory basically get given back through transportation, through shipping. So like, how have you, and like obviously like panelize is easier than like 3D volumetric. It's kind of like the density of value like per like shipment or something like that. Like, how do you think about that? And do you think he's overstating that as a challenge, or it's just something you have to figure out?
No. I think he's put on very correctly. And I would say we have designed things in order to do that on purpose. So panelized means, so we've designed everything to fit inside like basically like high cube open top shipping containers.
Mm-hmm.
And so while the transportation costs aren't none, it's mainly just turns into both a real estate capital challenge of where can we find a place where the transportation cost does not like overcome that. And again, where that happens to be valuable is in places where demand is very high,
Yeah.
right? And where construction costs are high. So that happens to be, I would say, coastal cities and mountain towns.
Yeah.
Right. So as we can drive the cost down, whether through like more like better transportation, more efficient transportation, or through, I'd say, R&D within the development system in general, like there will be more places we can build to. But it's mainly just kind of like a challenge of putting those two different things together. But like Brian's insight on that is absolutely correct. And it means like the only two ways you can do are build factories close to where the construction is going to go, where there's like a broad enough like demand for the very similar kind of product that you can build that without compromising the cost with transportation, or our approach, right, which is to take the gigafactory approach and to find types of materials that move very far distance. So the advantage of the panelized and the way that we're doing, which again was designed that way, is that we're moving very, very, very heavy pieces
Right.
that all fit inside these 2 to 3 containers per house.
Can I just on that? I mean, this touches on my biggest question for these types of businesses. You guys are admittedly approaching it quite differently than others, but when you think about the pitch to the VC side of your capital stack, and the story is about scale and growth, there seems in real estate there's just like natural obstacles to scale and growth, right? Identifying land that sort of fits these criteria. You added another criteria that I'd never thought about, is like sort of proximity to like efficient transportation networks as like a land criteria that maybe we wouldn't think about. Different entitlement sort of frameworks in different parts of the country, code issues, et cetera, et cetera. So when you think about like operationalizing this business from where you are today to where where you need to be sort of like a venture scale business in like a 5 or 10 year time horizon, what are the like major obstacles to scale that come from, most of the time that I think about VC businesses, I think about like software and as close to pure software as possible. Sure. Where, you're selling sort of you're selling bits, not atoms. You're selling something in the real world that also happens to be in probably one of the most regulated and bureaucratic parts of the real world. How do you think about that? What's the pitch to get a VC excited about that scale story and that growth story?
Well, first of all, I would say like we're very fortunate in that we've been able to raise quite a bit of venture capital already. So, but we'll certainly need to raise significantly more. So it's a totally and it's a totally reasonable question. I would say that which end do I want to tackle it from? I would say that there are lots of different places I fully agreeing that like regulation is a big problem. I would say there's one other one that maybe doesn't quite get that you didn't touch on, which actually goes back to a previous question you had before, which is why we're vertically integrated, which is that if suddenly it were just true and everyone knew that homes could be built in San Francisco for $200 a square foot instead of $1,000 a square foot, like what would happen to the price of land? Well, we all know, right? Like the land market is like pretty liquid, right? It moves pretty quickly. Brokers figure it out. And anytime someone says that like, oh, someone knows how to like renovate apartments for $8,000 a unit instead of $12,000 a unit, that immediately just gets captured, at least in an ask, by existing apartment owners. And the same thing would apply to landowners too. So I would say that like, going back to the other question, now the reason why we are vertically integrated is because if we're the only ones buying it, then I'm paying more than other people, but I'm still going to capture most of that value in unlocking the technology. Right. So that's one piece. However, all the different concerns you raise are like absolutely true in terms of it's extremely highly regulated. And it has a very different kind of profit margin than other software.
How's the business like, without divulging stuff that you don't want to share, but how's the business structured? Like, do the VCs also effectively own what I would think of as like the GP in the real estate deals? Are they actually exposed to the returns on the real estate assets themselves? Or are they just exposed to the manufacturing process, the intellectual property, the revenue that comes from that side of like selling into these deals?
So
share what you can. I would
say so. To the greatest extent that's possible, like they invest and own in the whole thing. Otherwise, right, again, as we all have dealt with like any real estate firm who is like vertically integrated, it's like, does the thing cost more? Like, are you making money in promote? Are you making money in fees? Like, people can shift things either way. So I would say like our investors are on both and every and all sides within the venture capital thing, because we could push costs around to right. Either way, again, like any other sort of vertically integrated firm. But I would say like the idea is that it's going to be captured through through technology and through altering appropriately the cost of the panels so that the real estate investors are getting their returns. Now, there's a little bit of a complication too of like, you obviously want to align interests, and that real estate investors don't want to feel like they're just being hosed again upfront on costs or on fees. So I would say like there is a reasonable way in which we have come up with to sort of manage those two different things together. Obviously, you can align promotes, you can align costs and fees and all those different things and change like how paybacks work. But I would say like we have thought about all those different things. And I guess I don't want to get into too many different specifics, but like I would say like I think it is solved in the exact same way that a vertically integrated like apartment developer also is compensated, like when they also have property management, when they also have construction in-house, and if they also owned like a subsidiary that provided, some sort of materials
Drywalling
too.
or
So
something.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So we have all the same challenges. And yes, they own the company and they would own the promoted interests.
Got it. That's
Makes
helpful.
sense.
Thank you.
I want to. We're getting into the weeds and the technicalities of the
fine.
of your business, which is great, and our audience, frankly, is like a bunch of like real estate nerds. So I think they'll really enjoy
That sounds
this.
great.
But I also want to hear a bit more about your kind of your relationship with townhouses. You kind of like think about them in this kind of like broader, almost like society level way. Tell us about townhouses. Like, what's so great about townhouses?
So obviously, as we've all been developers, right? I'd say like everyone is a product of good and bad above all things they've had, right? I'm sure there's 50 different stories you could tell me of things you will never do again, because you've learned like in a very specific way, why did you think, why not do something? So I have, my different peccadillos on that part too, but I would say like the rowhouses are one that's very like positive. And that comes from my career starting in Philadelphia, which is, there are a lot of rowhouses there. They're very nice. And I think Philadelphia, as well as any other Northeast city, has row home neighborhoods that have been working class for a very long time, where people have lived there for generations. And then they also have parts of row home neighborhoods that are, incredibly valuable, right? So you have the same topology that can be, the same 1,800 square feet that could be, $2 million, and that can be $300,000, right?
Right.
And the prices drop off significantly in some areas where, there's been unfortunately degradation of public services or safety or schools, all that stuff. But there are also just like very large like neighborhoods where they're stable and they're good and then working class for a long time. I think of like South Philadelphia, which is where frankly like a very large portion of Philadelphia's like actual building and trades workforce has lived for a long time. West Philadelphia has been like a Roman Catholic neighborhood too, for a while too. So anyway, I would say that my connection to the type comes from that, my career starting there, and then also through like my wife and I lived downtown, and we lived like in a high rise that I was fortunate enough to work on, but that our church, we chose that location because it was close to our church. And then I think like knowing a lot of other people live in the area, realized that the people who lived in the typology were the ones who were best able to stay. Now, there were some people like us who had kids and stayed in high rises, and that works in some neighborhoods better than others. Like I have family lives in the Upper West Side, and that can work on individual pre-war type building neighborhoods. But for the most societies, at least, or communities in the United States, it's the row house typology that provides like a much more appropriate like generational type. Like it is still own fee simple, right? It still has like something of a yard, like depending on how things are laid out. So it works really well. And then I think the other reason that to me resonate with wanting to do this one well is like I'd say row houses done in the late 19th and early 20th century just really beautiful. And mostly right now, they're just not nice. And in particular, the thing that you would notice about that degradation, even in like South Philadelphia, right, which are not expensive homes, the sound transfer between units is minimal. Right now, you go outside and like there's going to be the sound of like when people open windows, when that stuff goes together. But between the actual units, like it is built really well, and that is just like not something we do well today. And it's one of the reasons why that I'd say most like large tract home communities are detached. It's because it would be very expensive and very difficult to do to meet the performance of attached walls. So I'd say I like the typology. I think it works really well. And then also I think like when you look back historically, there are some things that the late 19th century, early 20th century row homes did really well. And, whether this is springboard and talking about family stuff or what else, I'd say one of the things I liked about them is the sizes are relatively small, and yet they work generationally for families, mainly because like the bedrooms are much smaller, or they don't have these massive closets, or the ratio between bedrooms to bathrooms is much more um, I guess like appropriate for keeping the overall unit size down. Whereas if you look at the townhouses that are built at scale in even like the Houstons of the world, which again is a relatively affordable market, they're going to be like 2,400 square feet, 2-car garage, like 4 stories, like pretty big. Whereas in the high demand parts of Philadelphia, DC, New York, Boston, they're going to be closer to like the 1,200 to 1,600 square foot, maybe 1,800 square feet. They're narrower and they just like work better for the places that you would find that would be walkable or more desirable. So it's not anyway, that's kind of, I'd say, like how it came out to be, both as a practitioner and as a resident.
I was going to ask just on that note, like, can you maybe illustrate for us what a typical American housing unit looks like, feels like? What are your typical floor plate sizes, unit count, or bedroom count? I mean, how much variety is there across like the product types that you guys are building?
Quite a bit of variety, I would say, like that again. So, we built we built a large number of our own machines, and one of the reasons to do that is so that we can build units of any width. So I would say like the product that we're building is mainly determined by what is the highest and best use in individual markets. Like, while I'd say the thing that I like to build the most, which we have a few of now like this, I really like when you have the kitchen, living, dining nook like on the ground floor. It's just really nice. Any garage is like detached. But that doesn't work in most parts of the United States, unfortunately. Like people do in fact need like parking in certain areas. So I would say like it's mostly determined by the individual markets. So we have units that have 1-car like attached interior garages. We have units that have detached single-car garages, and we have some that have attached like interior 2-car because that's what the market demands. So I think that the main thing that would differentiate our units from other people's is mostly just going to be in the performance of the walls and the assembly system. Like you would break your hand if you punched if you tried punching the wall of any of our units. It's made out of a fiberglass reinforced like cement board. It's like the things that I'm proud of. It's like a grade wall drywall finish, although there's no drywall and there's no wood. So those are the things I would say I'm mostly proud of. But and again, we could kind of take this in another angle that also is a little bit of industrial manufacturers housing too. But like, because we are vertically integrated as a developer, I believe very strongly that the way that people are going to buy our product is just like seeing it on Zillow or walking by. I don't think that the way that a house is made really has anything to do with whether or not someone wants to buy it. It's like, is this in a neighborhood that I like? Do I live here? Is it down the street from my kid's school? Is it around the corner from my kids' like preschool or church or coffee shop, wherever else is? And then the second question is like, can I buy it? So is it nice enough? Is it a place that I want? And can I buy it? Like, so I don't think that the way that we make anything should matter. And so while we might have some buyers who think that's kind of cool, it's just mainly like, can I get a mortgage? Right? What's the insurance? Can I afford it? Is it nice? And so I would hope there wouldn't be any distinguishing features other than someone to say, that's a really pretty row house. And so hopefully we establish a brand for doing things that are nice and things that are pretty, but not any other way. And that is also, I think, one thing that I would have that would be a critique of other manufacturing methods or manufacturers. Just like at the end of the day, I don't think the product is very nice. And so I think our product is nice.
Well, one of the benefits of row houses is like, if you think about nice as a function of material choices, there's only like one wall that really matters, right? Out of 4. And so there's this like cost effective way of like cladding, even with high quality materials, in a way that's cost effective. Like what do you guys like? I've seen a lot of your renderings, and people who have it should check it out on your website. It does look
Yep.
very nice.
Yep.
Do you have like is it kind of like almost like a design book that you pick from, or like how does the final cladding come about?
I mean, so we have projects right now that have stone. We have some that have metal panel, and some that are siding.
Yeah,
Um, so I would say again, like I think it just all depends on on what's appropriate in the market. So if those people go to a website and look, the thing that I would hope that they take away from is not that there's any specific like look. It's more that it is in fact adaptable, which again to me goes to one of the reasons what I like about the row house. Like if you look at it in the American South, or if you look in the Northeast or Boston or San Francisco, elsewhere, like it has its own like individual. It wears its own like suit or their own skin.
yeah,
It's still the same basic structure. It just looks different,
yeah,
right? And
right,
also, I think it's another reasonable thing, and I'm sure you guys have gone through this too, but like to me, I find like the best way of thinking about like neighborhood character or even beauty is mostly like, does it look in place
yeah,
with like the other stuff that's there? I mean,
yeah,
I love Brooklyn Heights. I think it's beautiful. I think like all brick is just like really nice. And yet there would still be something odd about putting like a Brooklyn Heights style row home in San Francisco, right? Where
right,
it's more about it's obviously more stucco and it's more about like uh, varied colors or things like that. So I'm sure it would be fine and no one object to it too much. But I think it's the
yeah,
principle of like what makes something beautiful is like, is it adaptable to the neighborhood that's there? So in places where we're trying to keep the price down, then sure, like we'll certainly try and use like siding that's done well. We have, I mean, fiber cement siding is certainly getting a lot better. Um, and yeah, I think it's mostly just trying to blend between like hitting affordability of trying to deliver something good that families can afford that they like first, like what looks good there. And I would I guess this no, I guess I don't mean this. I don't think this is a political statement per se. But like I am very sympathetic, I would say, to neighbors who have bona fide aesthetic objections to new housing going up. I think that
right,
that is like in fact a real thing for not everybody. There are some people who are just bad faith who are going to oppose anything going up. But when you're proposing any sort of density, I don't think it's completely unreasonable for people to say like I want it to be nice.
yeah.
And I've seen plenty of developments that have gone up that are just like objectively ugly. And I don't think someone saying, I don't want to live next to something that looks hideous is like a bad person. If they object to everything, then it means you can identify what camp they're in. But
Yeah.
Yeah,
pretty
totally
is
fair.
okay.
Giving yourself every advantage you can, and I think like pretty, it's interesting. Like often it's even a function of just like less is more, and I think that's one thing you guys
Yep.
do well. Again, like
Yep.
the materiality changes to be contextually appropriate, but it's also like you have this box, and then you have like one primary material,
Yep.
and you make it look good, and like that's a big
That's
part
right.
of it.
That's right.
Going back to townhouses, I think about townhouses as like striking a very good balance when we care a lot about the availability and affordability of housing in cities, infill development, which means necessarily that we're trying to increase supply so fit more units on a given lot, with like the desire for at least some of this housing to be conducive to like family formation and raising kids and so on. So like a lot of parents have a preference for a backyard, and it seems like row houses are like the perfect fit because you could take a typical one. Toronto, and like in our inner suburbs we might have like 60-foot lot, and maybe you'll fit 2 or maybe even 3 row houses on it, while maintaining the backyard, the kind of ground orientation. The only other kind of like typology that we've kind of explored that like strikes a pretty good balance within cities is the courtyard block. And like the only other American guest we've had so far has been Alicia of Urban Courtyards. And like I'm very much in favor of like courtyard block neighborhoods. The challenge that we face as developers is like I just can't imagine like how you like plan or prepare for that. Have to assemble like a whole block. It just seems like very challenged if you're not working with the consequences of a great fire, or like Houseman with his bulldozers just like clearing the whole block for you. Like it's hard to do that infill kind of like lot by lot, whereas row houses fit quite well. How permitted, like I don't know if you guys like have a map of like the country, like where townhouses are permitted, where they're not. I think about like Boom Arrow, another startup working in the real world, where they want to do ultrasonic flights domestically over the US, where it's been illegal for a long time, and they spent like a decade basically lobbying for this one policy change that would just like further unlock their value proposition. Now not only could they fly over water, but they can do over land. is there like a similar, like we know that, 20% of urban land in America permits row houses, and we're going to focus on our business and building housing, building machines, but we also have this one policy ask that if we could get it passed where row houses are permitted everywhere, then our TAM just kind of increases exponentially.
Two different things to pick up on. One, I'd say the policy ask that I've made, that we've made, is mostly just that industrial manufactured housing is not treated different than any other one. Like, I think like housing should be treated on its merits of like trying to achieve some sort of outcome. Like, if you want to require, passive house standards, or you want to require like some materiality or something like that, then that to me is the reasonable request of all different things. And so the thing that would make it easier for us is if it's just like, what are the requirements? Then can you meet them? And so that I would say is the one ask we have, which actually did make it into one of the president's executive orders earlier this year. So hopefully that will make its way through both at the federal level and individual states. I would say that like certainly it is the case that like it would be helpful if row houses were permitted in more places, but there's frankly like other people who are doing the work where that typology is kind of making its way through already in places that are particularly like high demand. And I think it's because there's enough familiarity with it. And it doesn't raise any of the concerns, most of which are unjustified, that come with things like single stair or like courtyard blocks and stuff like that too. I'd say I've looked at courtyard blocks too. I am frankly like not aware of any market where they make sense, like practically. Like, I don't know how you would actually do it, even at reduced construction costs, because as you mentioned, like the product only works when it's slightly larger. So, I mean, I think it's a very worthy goal to do. I just don't know how that works as a product. But we can make these work. I mean, we're doing projects here in Austin where they did a fairly broad, although obviously they're individual neighborhood HOAs, which have which are controlling on some different projects. But you can still find large parts of Austin where you can take down a single family house and build 3 homes on a 6,000 square foot lot. And I think in those places where people already live, it's a good area. It's a good way to like add density to places that are already in high demand. I think the challenge of whether it's multi within the US, like there's the opportunity zone thing, or whether it's something like courtyard blocks, the difficulty once you get to projects that are larger is by definition, like no one else lives there already. So it's not going to have as many of the other like amenities, again, like things like schools or transportation or even other mixed use. And while you could plan for it, isn't quite the same thing as these different places where there are already other apartments or there are already single family homes. And all we're trying to do is by adding density to like reduce that price, like where people are getting in at. And so for me, like, as a developer, like all I can do is look at markets where it's like, all right, if people are building and selling spec homes for whatever it is, what's $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, $800,000, whatever it is, so long as I can add 3 more and have that price be called like 80% or 70% or whatever it is of a higher price, then I have delivered something like at market rate for which I know there is demand. And some people want a slightly smaller house, probably with the same number of bedrooms. And then maybe they make enough money to be able to afford the bigger one later, or maybe not. But like, it's either way, like the demand is not unclear.
Yeah. That sort of raises a question for me, just out of curiosity. How big of a project do you need to sink your teeth into that's not too small? Like, what's the right sort of balance of scale versus like, I imagine there are a lot of lots like that 6,000 square foot lot you're describing, but it is like 3 individual units of housing enough for you guys as you think about, and maybe you're at the stage right now where sort of like any product is like proving the model and sort of getting you guys reps. But what's the ideal scale of like a single site and the number of units of housing that site would deliver for you guys?
So it's less about the individual project, right?
Okay.
And I think like the tension between like the individual sites is, so the 6,000 square foot lot that's infill, and again, this is kind of as a real estate investor, one of the things that I wanted to solve for. So I'm not the engineer, that's Riley, but we designed things together to make that happen. But the reason why I like the 6,000 square foot lot is the smaller you get, like the better fundamental real estate you're buying, right? And that I think is one of the tensions of like any other investor in real estate is like, if you have a certain box, the larger your building gets, the larger the site needs to be, the further out it needs to be, or the more people you're competing with, like the narrower your box gets. So the more that we can make those projects work, like the better it is that we are just building in fundamentally good land, right? Like A plus type locations. So I would say that that's sort of one side. When it comes to individual project level, it is less about how much we can do on individual lot. There are certainly things it's always going to be more efficient to do 300 than 3. But you're going to get better values on the 3. So I'd say practically for us, it's more about where can we get a sustainable mass within a market, right? So since we're building and selling, it's very similar to the incentives that have driven a lot of the large institutions that have started to like get into SFR, right? Which I think frankly, like other than the extreme level, like have turned out to like be not very good. I mean, I'm sure we both know a lot of different people who said like, I'm going to go buy 100 single family homes scattered site and make money. And that has just not really turned out to be that good of a business unless you're at like a massive scale. But since we're building and selling, we do mainly just need to be able to have like a crew or have a team or have a real estate operations arm be able to like churn through those different things. So I would not turn down 3. We are doing 3. We could do 3 like profitably on an individual marginal product, like in terms basis. It's more like I am not going to invest time to do 3 units in a single market. It's like, where could we do, a few hundred? Over time, and then eventually get to a few hundred over a year. Again, back to the other comment you made on like getting to venture scale. Like we will not be venture scale doing 3 unit projects forever. We will have to figure out some balance between 20 or 40. Like again, the only time we'll ever get into really large projects is if we can build homes straight up cheaper than Lennar or Brookfield, right? There's just no other way to go into the business, and that's not going to be for a little while.
You mentioned on that first policy ask about like treating housing as housing, it has its own performance, whether it's prefabricated or not. How do you deal with inspections? Has that been a challenge? Like we've often had inspectors, and there's like variance between who gets assigned your file. Some will come by and kind of like sign you off. Some will say like, open up this wall and show me what's going on. And presumably if that wall's a panel that came off the back of a truck, it's harder to do that. Like, has that been a bottleneck?
Not yet, but inevitably will be, right? Going to your point of like, so I would say technically our permits come from individual states. So we have to go through a process and get approved as a factor by individual states. So our building permits do come from them. But sort of back to what I mentioned before, like if a local inspector asks to see something, right? And you could say like, go screw yourself. I've got my permit. What are you going to do? Right. Again, he's like, well, let me tell you, there are many things that I can do where like you don't open up the wall. There's something else that's going to happen. So we will have to be, and we have been so far, just very forthright about telling the individual cities, like, here's what we're doing. Here's the overall goal. And that's why I think things like saying we are actively trying to build housing product that other people are not. Right. I want to build in areas where like they're near apartments. And so for all the different people who live in apartments or are thinking about having kids but want to stay, but they don't necessarily want to raise their kids in an apartment building, maybe they're willing to have their first baby in an apartment, but they want to move into this product later. I say like those conversations have been useful. So I haven't met anyone who like doesn't generally agree with like the mission of our company. So that works, but if we run into those individuals who are going to have that problem, like then we'll have to solve that, not through opening up that wall because that would compromise the entire system. But he said, great, we'd love to fly out to Austin. We'll show you how everything's made. Here's why it got through the different process. Like it met all these different like tests. It's why like these sprinkler systems are already inside. I can't rip this out because if I do, all these different things, all these different approvals that we already got go away. So we'll have to just be, again, I think like appropriately collaborative of like understanding like, we are still local developers, right? And in particular, in those places where you most want to build, they often have the people who will check the most, right? Like, so
that was actually my next question is that you guys are in Austin, presumably because it's the right place to build and manufacture. I suspect the markets that are most attractive to actually deliver housing are almost on the other end of the spectrum, like the
That's
NIMBY of
right.
challenging urban markets.
Yep.
Is that like the fair characterization, that you build in Texas and you sort of ship to places that are more difficult to actually get things built in?
Generally, yes, right. So the reason for Austin is because Austin is a place where you can test things. Like, it is one of the few cities in the United States where you can scale from a human capital talent perspective, like engineers, right? Because
Yeah.
we are, at the end of the day, like, our company's going to win because we have really smart people figuring out like really hard problems. And Austin, you can do that. Um, and we have been able to test different things on some of the different, like, YIMBY type housing initiatives. But our ideal markets are ones where they have passed YIMBY type like protections, and yet the prices haven't manifested yet. Right.
Right.
And I'd say we're fortunate, and that there are a lot of places like that where people where again, like, even if you were allowed to build townhouses in San Francisco right now, it doesn't suddenly drop the construction costs, right? They're still high. Why? Because it's still currently like, $4,000 for a studio, right?
Yeah.
And so it still is $50 an hour to pay someone to lay tile or to
Yeah.
do anything. So yes, like, our business is mainly about arbitraging two places where demand is high and construction costs are high. And then, as you know, through innovation, we take our costs from X down to half of X or a third of X. Then it sort of opens up more places where we can build.
Profitably.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure we will end up scaling in Texas, like, more, just because they are just enabling more units. And so when it comes to us hitting that overall scale, like, it's going to be, you know, it's going to be in those markets that enable the most number of units. So
Right.
we'll have to we'll have to find those challenges later. But for the time being, it's uh
One one
it's
one
kind of
one
both and.
follow-up question on
Yep.
the last thing we were chatting about the inspectors and your sort of manufacturing system. What's the backstory of, you mentioned Riley's the engineer.
Mhm.
What's the backstory of a real estate developer and an industrial engineer coming together? Like, very different skill sets, very different sort of like backgrounds. How does that sort of marriage happen?
Well, we became friends on Twitter, or became mutual friends through Twitter. So I would say, like,
Oh, there you go.
it is very much a place where you can meet other people who see different ideas. But um, we both reached the same conclusion on how a company needed to be formed, of like that it needed to be vertically integrated. I was approaching it very much from the real estate investor lens and from the product lens of like, I want to build this product for families. The costs just don't work. Like, I had tried for a bit to make that work um, within the apartment typology, but it just doesn't really work, because at the end of the day, the incentives to build studios just are too strong. And like,
Yeah.
it's important. Like, you have to just drive like rent per square foot by driving unit size down. So there are marginal differences and improvements you can make. And I did like a large study and survey on that one, of how you can make individual units like have more bedrooms to frankly like increase demand, which should increase like rent per square foot. So there are some incentives where you can push on that one, but like, really, the typology for families doesn't work within the 150 to 250 unit category, and that's who's funding those things. So to me, it came to the issue of like, I've got to figure out some way to drive down costs. So I was looking at some different solutions. I obviously wasn't going to be able to effectuate any of those on my own. And then Riley was coming up from the other angle. Like, I mean, his background is a mechanical engineer, and then working in space, and started a rocket company before joining SpaceX. And his sort of I'd say story was in being in Hawthorne at SpaceX, saying like, ostensibly some pro housing reforms have changed. Why is no one building? And then realizing like, oh, it's because the costs are really high. And it's like, okay, well, why aren't we building housing the way that we're building in the industrial manufacturing? And then I'd say like, he came up from that angle, and then ended up reaching a conclusion that like Tesla, like other places, it needed to be vertically integrated. So I'd say we were introduced, and then realized that we had a lot of things in common. And in particular, had a lot of things in common around like the way that we had to tackle the problem. Um, and yeah, and then like everyone else, like any other sort of partnership, you just decide like who you want to be in a foxhole with. And so, Riley is that for me, and I trust him with that entire side of the business, and I'm grateful that he trusts me with with making sure that our company makes money. So like
That's
it's
great.
it's important. But both are necessary parts. Like I can't fix anything or know anything on how the engineering works. I've got to pitch our investors and with confidence be able to tell them that, like, yes, in fact, the cost will be this, right?
Yeah.
And then we need to, the company does in fact need to be, opco propco.
Yeah.
Right. Zooming out a little bit, so your company seems to me benefits from more families, more people with young kids staying in cities, right, and looking for housing in cities as opposed to going to the kind of like tracks in the burbs where they're building detached housing for really low cost per square foot. And similarly, you're like enabling more families to stay in cities. There are all these like
I hope
other
so.
things, these other things that would like make it easier for families to stay in cities. You have a pretty cool and interesting and as far as I can tell, original take on like schools. Can you talk to us about that? Because like we think about this from many angles, and I never thought about like the school angle, and certainly not the one that you took. So maybe tell us about that as kind of like a fun diversion.
That's purely just based on one that I've seen, right? Like having lived around cities a long time and being in my wife and I lived in Philadelphia from we got married in 2010, and we were in that, I'd say, the part where I think cities, where to start from. Cities are always going to be great for young people, right? And I think they're always going to be best for, like, whether it's like whether you don't make that much money or living with roommates, or you make a little bit more and you have your own place. Like cities are just fantastic for like places to start your career, to meet people, all that different sort of stuff. And it will always be the most difficult, I think, like when you think about getting married, having children in particular. And then we start looking at like having children. Maybe you have one, you're like, wow, like you start looking at the cost of when that happens. So I would say, like, when I think about that in terms of schools, I like really, I'd say, like dialing in on that one, because it is a thing that even the most ambitious developers in the world can't do anything about. And it's also something that's so important that, like, there's no floor plan, there's no facade, there's no layout, there's nothing that will overcome that for the vast majority of families. No one says like, well, I love the floor plan, my favorite coffee shop's on the corner, the school sucks, we'll just send our kids there. Like that. Some people choose that one, but no one will consciously choose it that way, right?
Yeah.
So it ends up being like the thing around which people gate that. And so where I think that a lot of people end up opting out of it is like they look down the road and they don't see that many of the families around them, they say, and then it ends up becoming unfortunately ingrained of like, maybe I have a baby, maybe I have a toddler, but when it comes time to send my kids to school, like, we got to go. And so that it turns into this downward cycle of like, even in cities, unfortunately, like in Austin, where you've seen like an enormous amount of growth, right, in the entire metro and in the city entirely, like there is disenrollment, right? Is actual enrollment decline in the public schools. Now, some of that is because there's few more private schools, and some more homeschooling in Texas than other places. But like, I'd say the point remains of like that very, very, very important like public institution is not thriving. And so I think it provides, I think, an appropriate amount of humility to any developer. I'm like, yes, I want to build a great product. This is who we want to build it for. And yet, like, in order for it to be really successful, like, there's only so much that I can do. So it's why I think about our target demographic being exactly the people who are coming out of apartments up to the point where they're older, having kids. And my hope is that they would send their kids to pre-K, kindergarten with their other friends, and there's enough density there that they're willing to try. Because again, most couples that I know would be willing to send their kids to at least kindergarten to see, regardless of the rating, and would just like try it out. And if it doesn't work, or you need to live in your family, wherever else, like you'd make that change later. But like, I think the only way that we're going to keep families long-term is if from like kindergarten up, there's like upward positive pressure on like people just like leaving their kids in, and then it slowly gets better. And then you have more parents who are willing to invest in it, who are willing to advocate for the taxes investment that are required to make schools better, and then enrollment increases such that they get like more dollars like from the state. So anyway, the vast majority. I was homeschooled K through 12. My kids have been homeschooled at various points. My two of my kids are in public school at the moment. My youngest is being homeschooled by my wife. So I'm not I'd say prescribing any sort of specific like education thing as much. It is just the case that the vast majority of families are going to send their kids to the public schools, and so they need to be good. enough
Yeah.
such that you'd be willing to send your kids. So, um,
But if,
I don't know.
if beyond that, I think I totally take the point. It's kind of this negative spiral could be like kicked into a positive spiral if you
Yep.
like figure out the right mechanism. But there was more. You were kind of like talking about flexibility around like where we could place schools, where we could build them, getting them more integrated. Like, tell us a bit about that, because that was like from a built form, like urban planning standpoint. I thought that was very interesting.
Well, sure. Okay. I mean, I think to me it stems from the general observation of like walkable to who or walkable for what, right? And I think when people talk about walkable, and it's partly because the urbanist community does skew younger. The examples that are always given are like, oh, like I want to be around the corner from my favorite like coffee shop / that turns into a wine bar at night, and of course that sounds amazing, right? But anyone who has kids knows like the most important walkable thing is like, are you close enough to your kid's school, right?
Totally.
You have to
Drop
be
offs.
on time.
Yeah.
And a
You have to be
splash
on
pad.
time and pick up every there, right?
Yeah.
And if the buses are late by 5 minutes, right? Like it's bad. And if it's for daycare, if you're consistently 10 minutes late for like daycare pickup, like you're gonna get fined out the ears and maybe even kicked out, right? It's just bad. You have to be on time. Kids have to be on time. And that to me is like similar, I'd say, within the general idea of like walkability. It's like we need to be a lot more flexible in the way we're thinking about where schools are located or what types of schools. In the same ways that people are saying, like, I mean, you see the meme go viral all the time of like, we should have more coffee shops in the ground floor of like corner buildings. 1,000% agree. And I always like give like the appropriate retort of like, that should be a school too, or it should be able to be a school. And if it's not able to be a school, and if like we've designed entire cities where, there's walkable coffee shops, but the school is like way out middle of nowhere, or it's like just like SUV drop-off lines. It's like, then you've created this like way in which the city will never be walkable, truly walkable for families, like, or else they all have to be in SUVs, which just defeats the entire purpose of this neighborhood being walkable. So anyway, I guess you got me going. Like I could rant about that one for a really long time, but to me, it's really come down to like cities need to either be like ascendant and becoming like more walkable for families. And I think it's incredibly important, because if we don't actively make them that way, it's always going to be easier. And this isn't meant to be a to cast aspersions on the community in general. But like it's always going to be easier to make cities great for 24-year-old roommates, right? Like that's the easiest one. Although it's hard. It's very hard to make cities great for 38-year-old couples who have kids who are 5, right? Like that's the hardest one. Without them being obscenely rich. And I think that the neighborhoods in the cities that we've liked the most have been ones where there were, multi-generational families, like grandparents, 38-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds. Like that to me is like the hardest thing you need to do. And we really need to change the way that we think about schools, in particular, making them smaller. Because if they're not smaller, again, all the other things apply of like, if it's only drive through Starbucks, then, we've got coffee here, shopping there, elsewhere. I think schools also need to be integrated to the greatest degree possible in neighborhoods if the goal is true walkability, rather than walkability for the childless. And again, not this isn't saying that anyone's morally, yes, exactly. There's you're not worse if you don't have children, whether you're retired or whether you're young. It's more like it has to be made for children so that people can stay.
Well, including because if you want to keep families in the city, like, a lot of the benefits of the city get netted out if you're in your SUV in traffic all the time. It's like, well, if I'm going to be my SUV anyway, I might as well be in the burbs where there's less traffic. So
that's right.
Are any cities do like we do a lot of kind of like keeping track of which cities are doing land use planning like more interestingly than others, where are these infill projects more easily permitted than others? Is any city doing this kind of like flexible school placement better than others?
No. Unfortunately not. And that's why I think going back to a question you had said before, like where we're building, I do very much want to build in cities and make them a place where families stay. But the other thing where I hope that our product is also developed is in making existing high demand suburbs denser, right? Yeah. There are lots of existing like places where kids do walk to school, or they could walk to school if there was more like high quality row homes there. And they tend to be some areas that are very NIMBY, right? Yeah. And what I would hope is that if we can build a product that's nice enough to say, all of you guys lived in Brooklyn at one point because that's why you're rich and you didn't think you went to school there, wherever else. So like, if you just let us build something, hold us to the standard of make it be as nice as Brooklyn or as nice as whatever, Georgetown, whatever city you like. If we do that, then all we're doing is building homes so that like, that are close to the schools, and then so the other line that I've started going with in having conversations with people is like, in those areas too, they end up being most bothered by the SU pickup lines that are now like going down their block.
Totally.
Right? It's like, cool, like let's build homes for like elementary school kids, right? Like near and around the school, and then that way they aren't, or the SU pickup line isn't quite so long.
That's right.
It's
Cool.
a good social ambition.
Maybe as a wrap here, how far are you guys shipping? What does it take to get a Canadian housing corporation going? We've got, one thing that we're looking out for in the city of Toronto. There's this major policy change that's going to make lot splitting a lot more feasible, which means all these kind of like inner suburban, very wide lots will be suited for severance. And in my mind, row houses. One of the constraints we think about a lot, and you mentioned this a bit earlier, is like if somebody's buying a house, they probably want parking. These are parts of the city that are not very transit connected. And then how do you fit parking, especially when, at least in our city, urban planning doesn't want like parking pads in front of houses. But, there is this thesis also around like the upcoming ubiquity of robo-taxi services. And maybe that will unlock more kind of like non-transit adjacent sites for zero parking development. So I'm wrapping a lot into one question, but like, do you have any like, our company's called Toronto Standard. We don't think that constrains us to Toronto. Does your brand constrain you to America, or do you have ambitions beyond that?
It definitely does not constrain us to America. I would say now, practically for the next like couple of years, it does. Just because we still need to like get our factories right and that process correct. But like in within the first 5 years, God willing, we'll be in. I mean, Canada would be the city we'd be in other than the United States. I can't imagine being in any other country other than that. So we would certainly like to. And then I don't know. In general, in terms of markets, and this would apply to Toronto too. Again, assuming that like we could build and all that stuff. It's mostly just going to be. Is there a dimensity of is there sufficient level of demand for the entire product that we want, and do people generally understand where this works? Like, I think that makes sense to what you're describing. I know prices in Toronto are astronomical, like they are in most
Very
of the
high.
cities, and I think there's plenty of people who would make that appropriate trade between sharing walls, so long as the quality is good enough, and so long they could be in a neighborhood they wanted for that price to be a little bit less and the home to be a little bit smaller. Again, at that younger stage in their life. So I would say Toronto and Canada in particular checks a lot of those different boxes. We just need to dial in our product and probably make some changes between US and Canadian standards, but there shouldn't be that many. Like we're already at functionally passive house standards. And we're already fire rated, and we already have sprinklers and stuff. So, and we're seismic.
We'll
it should
leave
be
it at
fun.
like stay tuned for a future Toronto Standard American Housing Corporation.
There you go. I'd love that.
And by the time we have these robo-taxi services that eliminate the park requirement, we'll also have like these trucks that transport your panels will also be driverless.
That's right. That's right. The autonomous trucks.
Electric autonomous trucks to drop the cost of transportation. Hopefully with no tariffs at the border.
Cool.
Awesome,
well, this was great. Yeah, no, really appreciate you joining. If anybody wants to find out more, they should definitely check out your website, American Housing Corporation. But I think maybe even better than that is like follow you on Twitter. You're always full of really cool ideas and like floor plan layout reviews and that sort of thing. It's a great follow. Yeah.